icon, then play.
It's a regular day in Central Park in New York City. People are out and about enjoying the tranquil park as a man visiting from Japan sits with a set of drawings. People walking past have no idea that they're about to have a hand in creating one of the most iconic characters of all time.
Yours truly, of course. But to understand my awesome story, you have to know how he got to the park in the first place. You have to start back in the beginning.
In 1988, Sega releases the Mega Drive in Japan. And in 1989, they released it as the Sega Genesis in the US. By 1990, Sega looks to create a mascot with the main goal of
destroying Super Mario.
In the 1980s, Nintendo rules the home console market, first in Japan and then in the US. Sega's Mark III and its unofficial mascot Alex Kidd does little to bring awareness to Sega or their console, but they want all that to change when they release their new 16-bit console, the Mega Drive, aka the Sega Genesis. The 16-bit Genesis is far more powerful than the 8-bit NES, and releasing it in 1988, it beats Nintendo's 16-bit console, the Super Nintendo, to market by 3 years. Looking to take advantage of this lead, Sega wants to create a new mascot that would drive sales and increase brand recognition. But to get to that blue hedgehog we all know and love, it would not be straightforward. It would be dozens of zigs, zags, and loop-de-loops. In 1990, Sega holds an internal competition to find their mascot. They have over 200 submissions, all sorts of characters ranging from different shapes and sizes until eventually they choose Naoto Oshima's design, a blue rabbit.
Hi. I was originally meant to be Sega's mascot and go up against Mario.
Naoto Oshima was asked to partner with a programmer within Sega to help realize their new mascot. Naoto Oshima graduated college majoring in design. He starts working in advertisement before the video game boom in Japan catches his attention. He sees this up-and-coming industry to be far more interesting than advertisement. So, in 1987, he joins Sega. There, he puts his artistic talent to get use and starts working on designing monsters for Phantasy Star on the Sega Mark III. Here would be Oshima's first interaction with Yuji Naka, the lead programmer for the game. Oshima found himself impressed with Naka while working together and wanted to work with him again on future projects. Naka would take notice of Oshima's drawing ability, noting how despite being limited on the amount of colors he could use, always created amazing sprites.
So when it came time for Oshima to pick someone to work with, he chose Naka. Naka's vision for the game would come from his displeasure with the games that were currently being released. As a genius myself, I know what it feels like to have to take matters into your own hands to create greatness.
Naka didn't really like how you couldn't save most games at the time, causing you to restart each time you failed. This meant having to play the first few levels over and over again, which Naka found boring. His idea was to create a fast-paced game where skilled players could just zoom past the first few levels if they wanted.
Naka's idea was to create a supersonic game, a game that moved fast, much like the racing games he himself enjoyed. He would later talk about why speed was the thing for development. I think Super Mario Bros. Is a wonderful game, but if you play it every day, you always have to start from stage 1-1, right? Once you get good and memorize the levels, you can just hold down the B button and run through the stage, but even then, it just takes too long. With Sonic, I wanted to shorten that time if I could. My idea was that you progress slowly and carefully through the stages on your first playthroughs as you learn the enemy locations, but after you got used to them, you could really zoom straight through the levels. By the time Naka would work with Oshima on the game that would be Sonic the Hedgehog, he had already experimented with speeding up scrolling speeds while porting the arcade game Ghouls 'n Ghosts to the Sega Genesis. He felt he could improve on these speeds with the intention of the player being able to feel the intensity, similar to what a jet pilot might experience. And combining fast speed with a rabbit seemed like a match made in heaven. They proposed their idea to the Sega board members. However, they went in with more than just ideas. They also brought marketing materials, a demo, and a plush version of their mascot. The demo showed a character moving fast on the screen and running through tubes that did 360-degree loops. But what really stood out to Sega was the marketing material they brought. Their idea was to use a fast character to show off the processing speed and the power of the Sega Genesis. And this was the perfect way to advertise both their new game and the Sega Genesis hardware. So with Sega's approval, they got together with a team of 5 people and formed AWA, a division within Sega that would be dedicated to creating their new mascot. Sega wanted games that would beat their rivals at Nintendo, specifically their mascot Mario, but something different was already taking place. Instead of beating Mario being the main thing, the team would focus on pushing the limits of the Sega Genesis and coming up with ideas that were conceptually different. But the push for something new and fresh would come with a series of speed bumps. Though Naka's idea of speed seemed to meld well with Oshima's rabbit aspect at first, things would quickly stall as one specific issue arose. And unbeknownst to the team, Naka was hiding the answer to their problems the whole time.
As a fellow inventor and genius, I too have many secrets.
The original idea was for me to move fast and attack by picking things up with my ears and throwing them. But AW8 soon realized this interrupted the game's flow, and Naka felt that picking up items and aiming them required too many button presses and complicated the control scheme.
So the team needed to find a new attack. Naka would even go as far as to say, all of your ideas, anything you've been hiding, cough it up now. He said this all while hiding an idea of his own. When Naka was in high school, he got the idea of a somersault attack, an attack where the player character would turn into a ball to hit the enemy. But he wanted to save it for his own game that he would create when he eventually quit Sega and opened up his own studio. But because no one was able to come up with something that was just as good or better, he finally caved and brought his idea to the team. A rolling attack could be utilized by a single button press and would allow them to keep up and transfer the character's momentum without losing speed, and in some instances, the rolling could be used to increase the player's speed. And by having the characters turn into a ball and roll, it would also free up processing. It was the perfect idea. But the next problem for the team was a rabbit attacking by doing a somersault felt too odd. Oshima would say, if a rabbit does a somersault attack, it's just going to hurt itself, right? We thought it would be better to have some animal with a hard shell or spines. At one point, Sega got involved and suggested things they would want to see, which included a character with quills like a hedgehog or porcupine, a bulldog, and a man with a mustache. It was around this time Oshima traveled to the US. Here he finds himself in Central Park with a handful of his drawings. He's taken upon himself to do a survey to find the right character for their game. To him, it's important to see what characters people gravitate to the most. He shows the 3 pictures to the park goers, none of them aware, perhaps not even Oshima himself knows, they're in the process of making history. One by one, people come and make their selections until Oshima is satisfied with the amount of data he collects. People like the dog as their 3rd favorite, the man with the mustache as their 2nd favorite, and their favorite amongst all of them.
And they chose the most loathsome and vile of all of God's creations, a hedgehog.
And let me tell you, that hedgehog is way past cool.
Did you know that hedgehogs actually eat poop and rub it all over their bodies? It's a fact. Look it up.
I'm way too cool for that. The only thing I eat are chili dogs.
It was at this moment that Sega truly found their mascot during a quiet afternoon in Central Park. Though the work was far from over, the characters in the game still needed fine-tuning back in Japan, and Sega of America would try to kill Sonic before he could even run his first steps. However, this experience did reassure Oshima that the hedgehog could appeal to a global audience, regardless of culture or background. Oshima would say, early in the development, we had the gameplay idea down, but we didn't have a character yet who fit it. Yamaguchi created a hedgehog character. Though it was completely different from the Sonic we know today, I combined a character idea I had with Yamaguchi's hedgehog, and it seemed like it could work. Oshima, with the help of Yasushi Yamaguchi, aka Judy Toyota, created the first designs for Mr. Needlenose. The next step was giving Mr. Needlenose a more appropriate name. They toyed with the different ways to say Lightspeed in Japanese. But then someone mentioned the word supersonic. The team liked this name, but since super was already being used heavily by another company, they shortened it to just Sonic, and thus, the AW8 team became the Sonic team. Creating Sonic's design was easy for Oshima, but for Naka, translating those designs into the game was a struggle. Getting Sonic's proportions right from the side was a challenge because he was having trouble figuring out how he would look running and rolling. To solve this issue, Naka requested that Sega create a sculpture of Sonic out of clay. Having a 3D reference for Sonic allowed Naka to better get his proportions and animate him in the game, because 3D, after all, was what Naka was trying to replicate. When it came to Sonic's visual style, the team became committed to wanting to do something different and unconventional. They were also obsessed with the images of high-end computer graphics that they saw in magazines. Soon, they were thrown into a world of polygons and ray tracing. Naka would try to create a 3D Sonic with the Genesis hardware, but it lacked the power to produce those graphics. Kazuyuki Hoshino, the art director of Sonic the Hedgehog, would say of the game's art design, "The Sonic design direction was pushed by a fond affinity for high-end computer-generated graphics. But in those days, 3D computer graphics were very new. Having a computer that could render polygons and vibrantly colored three-dimensional worlds was very exciting. Only a select few had a machine that could do that. So our designers gorged on computer magazines. They were laying all around the office, setting these images of high-end visuals, wishing they could have them in their game, which was technically impossible when programming for the Mega Drive, of course. But with the team still wanting to produce those same 3D renderings they saw in the magazine, they decided to do the next best thing, to fake it. Having the clay model of Sonic helped the team reach their vision. Despite the Genesis being a new console, the Sonic team would push it to its limits even without using 3D polygons.
The Genesis was the first 16-bit home console. Like me, it was super fast and able to produce way more colors than an 8-bit game system. So they decided to use that to their advantage to help me look as good as possible."
Naka and others realized that they could use the fact that the Genesis was able to produce more colors to their advantage. With the idea of mimicking high-end graphics, the team employed a number of tricks. In art, the difference between a circle and a sphere is shading. Because of the additional colors the Genesis was able to produce, they could blend colors together more cohesively to fake a sense of volume and depth similar to what you would see in a traditional drawing. They added checkered backgrounds like what they saw in images of 3D renderings in magazines. They added highlights to surfaces, especially around objects, to give them a look of dimension and volume. Certain planar surfaces like leaves were given a polyagonal look, and shadows were added to everything to fake a sense of depth. Essentially, they faked ambient occlusion before ambient occlusion was a thing. They would also mimic ray tracing, which is a way for a computer to calculate the light on an object. Naka would explain, "The whole game was designed so that the screen looked as if it was drawn by ray tracing. Through this style, I was able to make the 2D rings look as if they were rotating and were reflecting the light." With Sonic development well underway, it was time to work on the story. Sonic would be a part of a rock band, and instead of fighting a traditional villain, his journey would be about helping his girlfriend, Madonna.
Furries ain't even that weird.
Yes, Sonic had a human girlfriend, so for anyone who thought this was weird, just know it was the plan all along.
Yeah, back then I was the lead singer of a band and had a longtime girlfriend named Madonna. The idea was to have me be as cool as possible, so it only made sense to make me a rock star.
Mark Cerny is the lead architect designer for PlayStation, but back in the 90s, he worked for Sega. While visiting Sega's studio in Japan, Cerny is asked by Oshima what he thinks of Sonic and other characters' designs. The idea was to get an American's opinion on the different characters. However, Cerny did suspect that what Oshima really wanted was feedback on Sonic himself and was using the other characters as a distraction. Cerny decided that he would run the characters by Sega of America's marketing team. Their feedback wasn't ideal. Mark Cerny would say about the feedback he received, "Unsalvageable. This was a disaster, and that procedures would be put in place to make sure that this sort of thing would never happen again." These procedures included a proposed top 10 list of do's and don'ts to follow when making products for an American market. Additionally, I was told that the marketing group would be contacting a known character designer to make a character that showed exactly what the American market needed. Sega of America's marketing team hated Sonic and his girlfriend. They thought Americans would find him having a human girlfriend would be too weird. To the marketing team, Sonic just wasn't a game, he was Sega's weapon against Mario and Nintendo itself. They didn't think that they would be able to fulfill Sonic and Sega's destiny if Sonic had a human girlfriend and was associated with rock music. They also didn't care for Sonic's design and wanted a character designer to give him a makeover, believing that anthropomorphic animals was too Japanese and wouldn't be a good fit for an American audience, despite the Ninja Turtles, Mickey Mouse, Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, Felix the Cat, Garfield, and many others being very popular and embraced by an American audience at the time. Based on this feedback, the Sonic team got rid of Madonna and Sonic's band.
Yeah,
Me and Blue could have been great together. I mean, after all, no one complains about Jessica Rabbit. And I'm pretty sure something funny was going on in those sewers between those turtles and that reporter. But it just wasn't meant to be. But even though they got rid of the band, some of those guys still made it in later games. So there's still hope for me. Woo!
With Sonic's girlfriend gone, the game needed something else to be the driving force for Sonic. He needed a villain.
I'm glad they got rid of Madonna. I wasn't going to be reduced to capturing the same woman over and over like a certain giant lizard we all know. I had greater and more original machinations. I wanted to collect chaos itself in the form of 6 Chaos Emeralds.
So, like Thanos?
Nothing like Thanos. I did it first.
Thanos first collected the Infinity Gems in 1990.
I will end you.
Oshima would come up with Sonic's new antagonist using the second most liked design from the survey in Central Park. The new villain would be named Dr. Eggman, or Dr. Robotnik as he was known briefly in America before reverting back to his original Japanese name. His evil plan was to collect the 6 Chaos Emeralds while turning various animals into robots. Sonic's job would be to free the animals and save his friends. Sonic's world would be vibrant and colorful while also being futuristic. It was nature and technology colliding. This marked a major story shift for Sonic. It just wasn't about stopping the villain. There was a message tucked away in the story. Yuji Naka spoke about Eggman and the meaning behind Sonic's story. Dr. Robotnik is a slightly radical representation of all humanity and the impact humanity is having on nature. In 1991, it was a very sensitive subject to talk about, the environment, and while I had my viewpoint, I did not speak of it. With Sonic, I was given an opportunity to express my views in a different way and did so, showing Robotnik using pollution and creating machinery which desecrates the environment, and it is down to Sonic to change his ways. Despite the marketing team not liking Sonic's design, Oshima and others would move forward with the design as is, a move we all know worked out for the best. So if you ever wonder why 90s babies were so obsessed with taking care of the environment, it's because we grew up watching things like Captain Planet and playing Sonic the Hedgehog. But even with this design, a more traditional storyline of good guy versus evil was perfect for Sega of America's marketing team, as they wanted to have Sonic in TV shows, comics, and a whole slew of marketing material. While all this was going on, Naka was facing challenges of his own, in the terms of coding. Naka and the team were trying to overcome flickering screens and dropped frame rates, while making Sonic as fast as possible. Naka pushed the limits of the Genesis by having the game scroll faster than any other game at the time, perhaps too fast as players reported feeling dizzy and nauseated by the game. Another issue was getting the difficulty right for the game. Sonic went through a lot of retooling trying to find the perfect balance of fun and difficulty. They took the feedback seriously and decided to slow Sonic down, but Naka wanted to maintain that sense of supersonic speed, so they slowed down the backgrounds while moving. Despite them slowing down the game so people wouldn't get motion sickness, Sonic was still one of the fastest moving games of the time. So combining that with the slowed down backgrounds gave the illusion that Sonic was moving faster than he really was, while also making sure players weren't getting dizzy. The result was a game that was unlike anything else on the market. Players could reach incredibly high speeds, and the smooth animation created a sense of fluidity that was unprecedented at the time. They were creating a fast-moving game where your character's momentum was key to pushing you forward and defeating enemies. Though it wasn't their original intention, the Sonic team had created a game that was the opposite of Mario. Mario's movement was all about timing your jumps just right and the joy of execution. It's about observing the area and then moving forward with your plan of attack. The result is a fun and methodical experience. Sonic, on the other hand, is about getting good so you can move through the levels as fast as possible. Sonic is best played by constantly moving forward. Backtracking isn't easy as the game's levels themselves are meant to push you forward. Going back oftentimes means literally an uphill battle unless you find an alternative route back or the level requires you to go back, like the Marble Zone, which had a level much closer to a traditional Mario game. As Naka and team continued to work on Sonic, they realized there would need to be another change to Sonic's design.
They realized that when the water from the Green Hill Zone was behind me, I was too hard to see, so they made my fur darker blue, which just so happened to match the blue in the logo for Sega.
Silence is golden. But when your goal is to rival a game with one of the most iconic soundtracks of all time, silence isn't an option. Masato Nakamura is forming a band called Dreams Come True, which will one day become one of the world's biggest pop bands. He plays bass for the band and one day dreams of making a soundtrack for a movie. Nakamura's producer is having barbecue with a Sega executive. They talk about how Sega wants Nakamura to compose music for Sonic the Hedgehog. Nakamura would accept, but he realizes what he's up against. Sonic was meant to be Mario's rival. So in his mind, his music would need to rival Mario's as well. Because Nakamura had a passion for creating movie soundtracks, he saw this as his chance. He would treat the Sonic music like his own movie soundtrack. He believes the melodies are important because they will help draw people in before they even start playing. But creating the soundtrack would mean he would work within the restrictions of the Genesis's hardware. He would say, from a vertical standpoint, only 6 notes could be played together, including the drums, chords, and melody. It wasn't about chords anymore. It was about expressing the music with just 6 notes, so I only used 6 notes when composing the midis. I allotted 2 notes to the hi-hat, the kick, and a third to the melody, and used the remaining 3 to generate chords. It probably seems restrictive now, but this was just a given at the time. So I worked on the assumption that the game music could only generate 6 notes. I created it purely from this point of view of this is all I can really use. So the challenge is how good the music could be with just a good melody, a good bass line, and minimum drums. To help create the music, Nakamura looked at the many zones and created music that would reflect the look and feel of each zone. The end result was a series of pop music that continues to entertain today.
You can't tell me that the Green Hill Zone song isn't a bop.
And it's iconic too, as it even made its way into the live-action Sonic movie. With everything set, Sega released Sonic the Hedgehog in June of 1991. And in Sonic fashion, he didn't walk onto the scene, he ran. With Sonic's success came an aggressive advertisement campaign focused at Nintendo. At the time, Nintendo hadn't released the Super Nintendo worldwide, so to most people, they were comparing this to this. To help push Sonic and the Genesis even further, Sonic the Hedgehog was bundled with the Sega Genesis. They grasped a hold of the market and cemented themselves as rivals to Nintendo. But whether or not they succeeded at beating Mario is up to you.
Nothing wrong with a little friendly rivalry, but people act like we hated each other. Even Yuji Naka, who's widely considered to be my father, said he never wanted me to beat Mario, but be good enough to stand by his side. Rivalries are great because they push you and make you better. Our game was great because of Mario, and Mario became better because of me. And at the end of the day, all this just means is more fun for the player. I know a lot of Nintendo kids have good memories of going over their friend's house who had a Genesis and playing Sonic for the first time. I think giving players new and better experiences is the coolest thing a developer can do. Rivalry should make you better, not divide you.
And the end result was Sonic becoming one of the most recognizable faces in gaming and his popularity increasing with each sequel. Sega's marketing team had it planned from the start to put Sonic in front of as many eyes as they possibly could. They did so by putting Sonic on everything they could, from bath soap to clothing, games, not so great games. Sonic would have a huge cultural impact, not just on gaming, but on pop culture as a whole. And it all started with the idea of beating Mario. And became so much more. Sega wanted a rival. The Sonic team gave them a character with a life all of his own that could stand on his own with or without Mario.
I'm not even in this game, but I was told if you don't make an appearance, people will be mad.
The Sega team proved that when it comes to video games, there's always room for one more icon. And Sonic's story is far from over. There's the sequels that I think that are even better than the first game. And there's a lot to cover with those. So make sure you stick around and subscribe.